Okay. Um, Good evening, dear students. In this lecture, we are going to study Turkish politics, and during this course, we will be talking about different aspects of Turkish politics. We will examine Turkish politics in its historical context, and we will refer to different important events and issues within Turkish politics within this historical context. As you can see from the course outline, we will start with the late Ottoman period. So in this subject, we will mainly focus on the modernization and the transformation period of the Ottoman Empire. And in this context, we will consider the reform process, the origins of these reforms, um, and the key players within these reforms. Uh, After this discussion, we will move on to the important treaties. Um, at, the, uh, at the last days of the Ottoman Empire, and we will refer to the establishment of the Turkish Republic. We will refer to the key treaties, the texts of the um, establishment of the Turkish Republic, and then we will move on to the constitutions of the early republic. We will discuss and explain 1924 constitution firstly. Then we will move on to the 1961 constitution and 1982 constitutions. We will compare and contrast these three constitutions, and after doing so, we will discuss the democratization of the constitution making in Turkey. Meanwhile, we will also refer to the multi-party system in Turkish politics, and we will discuss how Turkish political life moved from a single party system into a multi-party system with the elections. These will be interesting subjects to discuss, and we will try to explain all of them and try to analyze them in detail during this course. Okay, so let's begin with the transformation and modernization of the Ottoman Empire. You can find the PowerPoints of this subject in the first week of our course. So you can refer to these slides when you are studying this subject. Okay, let's look at the origins of this transformation and modernization phase, and let's analyze the reforms and the key players in these reforms. Okay, so the transformation and modernization of the Ottoman Empire began in the late 18th century. This period continued into the early 20th century. This transformation aimed to revitalize the empire and also its institutions. What was the motivation for this transformation? The aim was to respond to the internal and external challenges of the Ottoman Empire. This process was also known as Tanzimat, and this process involved extensive reforms in various aspects of governance, economy, military, and society. So, we need to understand the social, political, and historical origins of these reforms, as well as the key players within these reforms. This understanding will provide you a valuable insight into the factors that shape the empire's development during this crucial period. Okay, so let's look at the social, political, and historical origins of reforms. Okay, decline of the Ottoman Empire started in the late 17th century. During this time, the empire faced a series of military defeats and territorial losses. You remember these issues from your history courses. So, these military defeats and territorial losses highlighted the need for change. In addition to that, there was the increasing influence of European powers in the region, and there was a growing demand of the empire's diverse population to make it difficult to maintain the traditional order. So you remember the minorities within the Ottoman Empire, and this diverse population was demanding for more rights and more autonomy, and this is making it more difficult to maintain the order in the empire. Okay, there was also a very important influence coming from Europe. So, at the time, there was the intellectual movements of the Enlightenment period in Europe. And as you remember from your other courses, Enlightenment period emphasized reason, science, and individual liberty. These values inspired also the Ottoman elites, and Ottoman elites decided to adopt these Western ideas and models of governance. In addition to that, the European powers actively encouraged the Ottoman Empire to modernize its institutions, and they also encouraged the Ottoman elites to adopt a European style reforms to facilitate trade and diplomacy with Europe. Okay, there was another important factor during this period, and it was the need for an internal social change. Okay, as we said before, the empire had a complex social structure and a diverse population. And this social structure necessitated these reforms because there was a tendency, an increased tendency of urbanization, and there was also increasing religious and ethnic tensions among these social groups. So there was a need to deal with the growing social and economic inequality between these groups, and also to provide a response to the challenges of urbanization as well as the tensions between these groups. Okay, so far we have discussed the motivations within the Ottoman Empire for this reform process. Okay, let's look at the key reforms. So, as a result of these motivations, which reforms took place in Ottoman Empire? The first one is in the context of administration. So there has been administrative reforms in the first category. Okay, so the Tanzimat period, as we referred before, saw the introduction of new administrative reforms. Tanzimat period extended from 1839 until 1876, and this period witnessed the introduction of new ministries, recognition of the bureaucracy, and also establishment of the modern legal courts. Okay, so these were the administrative reforms, and in the other category, we find the military reforms. Okay, during this Tanzimat period, Ottoman Empire's military underwent a series of reforms. The aim of these reforms was to modernize the military tactics, technology, and organization. And these reforms followed the European models. So the basic example for this military modernization was the European military structure. During this period, there were notable reforms, including the establishment of military academies, introduction of a new military technology, etc. So this was the second important category of reforms. In the third category, we find the economic reforms. Okay, so in this category, the Ottoman Empire sought to diversify its economy and to increase its revenue. The main point here was to promote industrialization by adopting modern fiscal policies. They also tried to develop the infrastructure and liberalize the trade. Therefore, through these reforms of modern fiscal policies, infrastructure development, and trade liberalization, the Ottoman Empire tried to increase its revenues and promote industrialization. In the final category, we find the social and cultural reforms. In this category, Tanzimat reforms aimed to create a more inclusive society, and the means of creating a more inclusive society was to introduce measures that granted equal rights to non-Muslims. We referred to the diverse ethnical structure, religious structure in the Ottoman Empire before, and to create a more inclusive social structure, Ottoman Empire needed to grant equal rights to non-Muslims and also promote education and cultural exchange with Europe. Okay, in this context, we discussed Tanzimat reforms in four categories. The first one was the administrative reforms, the second one was military reforms, The third category was the economic reforms, and the final category was the social and cultural reforms. Okay, so let's discuss these key reforms by referring to their details and to their explanations. Okay, during this transformation period or reform period, there was the reign of Sultan Selim III and Sultan Mahmud II. Okay, these modernization efforts aimed to strengthen and revitalize the empire by focusing on the military, economic ideas, and secular ideas. So, based on these motivations, they tried to establish Western style military schools, increase the secularism within the society, and create economic reforms to maintain this transformation. Okay, let's discuss the military reforms and the establishment of Western style military schools. As we said, these reforms took place during the reign of the Sultan Selim III. And Sultan Selim recognized the need to modernize the Ottoman military. So he initiated the New Order reforms. You remember New Order reforms from your history classes as Nizam-ı Cedid. These reforms tried to reorganize and train the military along the European lines. We have already said that the military reforms aimed to reform Ottoman military in the line of European armies. So they focused on the discipline, tactics, and the technology of the European armies when they are creating and establishing these reform process. So, as part of these Nizam-ı Cedid reforms, Sultan Selim III established the first Western-style military schools in the Ottoman Empire. These new military schools include the Naval Engineering School and the Imperial Military Academy. These schools aimed to provide modern military education and training to their students and to emphasize scientific knowledge and professional skills in terms of military. Okay, we can also explain Sultan Mahmud II's military reforms. So, these reforms built upon Sultan Selim III's military reforms. Sultan Mahmud II continued to reform the Ottoman military by abolishing the traditional Janissary Corps. He established new and modern military units, and he also expanded the empire's military education system by creating new schools and improving existing institutions. Okay, so let's move on to the second important aspect of these reforms. We have already talked about the spread of secular ideas in the Ottoman Empire. Let's explain this issue in detail. We have already said that There was the crucial influence of the Enlightenment period in Europe over Ottoman Empire. The intellectual movements of the Enlightenment period emphasized reason, science, and individual liberty. These concepts had significant impact on the Ottoman Empire. Many Ottoman intellectuals and officials were inspired by Western thought, and they tried to incorporate these secular ideas into Ottoman Empire's governance and society. Secondly, educational reforms are also important in this context. So, these educational reforms can be considered as part of the broader modernization efforts. In this context, the Ottoman Empire introduced new educational institutions, a new curricula, new teaching methods, and by doing that, they promoted secular subjects such as science, mathematics, and modern languages. This shift in education facilitated the spread of secular ideas among the Ottoman Empire's elite and middle classes. In this subject, in this category, there is also another issue that we need to explain. These are the legal and administrative reforms. So, the Tanzimat period also witnessed these legal and administrative reforms through the introduction of modern legal codes and courts. These were also heavily influenced by European models. These reforms aimed to create a more secular and rational legal system and to reduce the influence of religious institutions and traditions of governance. Okay, so far we have discussed the first two categories, the military reforms and the secular reforms. Let's explain the economic reforms in detail. In the first category, there are the fiscal and monetary reforms. During the reign of Sultan Selim III and Sultan Mahmud II, the Ottoman Empire adopted significant fiscal and monetary reforms. These include the introduction of new taxes, establishment of a modern banking system, and the adoption of a standardized currency. The aim of these reforms was to stabilize the Ottoman Empire's finances and to promote economic growth. Therefore, the elites, the ruling group, tried to facilitate trade with their European partners in the modern economic structure. In this context, they also needed to develop the infrastructure. With this aim, the Ottoman Empire invested in the development of modern infrastructure such as the roads, railways, and telegraph lines, and they tried to improve communication and transportation. These infrastructure investments facilitated the European integration for the Ottoman Empire, and also these developments facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and people with European countries. Okay, You may heard of these reform processes in your history courses, so you might be quite familiar with these concepts. Let's continue with the reform in terms of industrialization and trade liberalization. So, the Ottoman Empire needed to modernize its economy and to promote its trade liberalization. With this aim, the empire adopted policies that encouraged the foreign investment. As you realize, even based on today's economy, that foreign investments in this country are critically important for achieving an economic growth. Ottoman Empire also needed to encourage technological transfer and the establishment of modern factories through this technology. Therefore, the Ottoman Empire tried to cooperate with the European partners in order to achieve this technology transfer, establish modern factories, and to achieve economic growth. In addition to that, Ottoman Empire also pursued trade liberalization. With this aim, the empire signed various treaties with the European powers in order to open its markets and to reduce the trade barriers in trade with its European partners. Okay, so far we have discussed the economic reforms, and now we need to move on to another subject. These are the reforms on equal citizenship. As we said before, for for Ottoman Empire, which has diverse populations in terms of ethnicity, religion, and language, such reforms had significant importance to create equal citizenship rights and also to struggle to deal with the rise of nationalist tendencies among these groups. Okay, so during the 19th century and the early 20th century, Ottoman Empire witnessed significant changes in terms of its social, political, and ideological landscape. Um, the Tanzimat and Islahat reforms started this process, and these continued with the emergence of the political associations in shaping the Ottoman Empire's future. So, in terms of these developments, we need to firstly refer to how the equal citizenship rights were established through Tanzimat and Islahat reforms, and then we should understand the role of these political associations for Ottoman Empire. Okay, so let's begin with the Tanzimat reforms in terms of the citizenship rights. Okay, as we tried to explain so far, Tanzimat period aimed to modernize and centralize Ottoman Empire's administration, legal system, and society. We referred to the reforms in different contexts, and a key aspect of these reforms was also the promotion of equal citizenship. This concept was borrowed from the European countries and it entails equality in rights regardless of religion or ethnicity. We can give examples to the introduction of these rights um, through Hattı Şerif of Gülhane and Hattı Hümayun. You must be familiar with these texts from your history classes. Okay, so let's explain the role of Hattı Hümayun, what it means for equal rights for all citizenships, what it entails. Let's describe this one first. Okay. Hattı Hümayun granted religious and civil rights to non-Muslim subjects in the Ottoman Empire. These rights included rights of property, ownership, access to education, and equal treatment in courts. So these rights were actually the basic rights established within the European countries at that period, and the Ottoman Empire borrowed these ideas from the European countries and it adopted them into its internal structure. This was a significant shift in Ottoman Empire's traditional millet system. You must be aware of the millet system, which differentiated between the Muslim and non-Muslim subjects. Okay, let's discuss the Islahat reforms in this context. Islahat reforms was built on the Tanzimat reforms, and this period further expanded the equal citizenship rights. The aim was to decentralize the governance and grant greater autonomy to provinces. The aim of this greater autonomy was to promote local participation and equal representation of all citizens, and they built upon the previous reform structure. Okay, so we need to talk about the 1876 Constitution in terms of these democratic rights. Okay, so 1876 Constitution is the first Ottoman Constitution. So the significance of this constitution comes from its establishing a new system, a new structure for the Ottoman Empire. There was the reign of Sultan Abdülhamid II during this constitution, and he established a bicameral parliament and he provided for constitutional monarchy with this move. So we are very familiar with this structure from the European countries which implement these constitutional monarchy regimes. Especially in United Kingdom, we find both the traditional role of monarchy and at the same time we find the parliamentary regime and these two elements are providing checks and balances within the political structure. Therefore, The first constitution in Ottoman Empire, the 1876 constitution, provided a similar structure for the Ottoman Empire by establishing a bicameral parliament and also um, by granting rights to this parliament, it created a constitutional monarchy for the Ottoman Empire. The aim of this constitution was to balance the competing ideologies of Ottomanism and nationalism. As we said before, the Ottoman Empire had diverse populations and a complex political system due to many minorities in terms of ethnicities, languages, and religions. Therefore, this constitution aimed to create a balance between Ottomanism and nationalism of these newly emerging or newly awakening nationalities. Okay, let's try to explain what we mean by Ottomanism and nationalism in this context. Okay. By Ottomanism, we refer to the ideology that creates a unified, multi-ethnic Ottoman identity. This identity, first and foremost, emphasizes loyalty to the state and to Sultan. This first constitution, incorporated the Ottomanist ideals, such as it provided equal citizenship rights and it promoted a common language, which is Ottoman Turkish, for all minority groups, for all society. So it referred to this Ottomanism in principle. When we discuss nationalism, we are already aware that there were the rise of nationalist movements among Ottoman Empire's various ethnic groups. As you remember from your history classes, there are the Greeks, Armenians, Bulgarians, and they posed a challenge to the Ottomanist project. Therefore, this first constitution attempted to address these nationalist aspirations by granting them greater autonomy. So the provinces were granted a greater autonomy in order to ensure representation of all citizens, all minorities in the parliament. However, the first constitution did not function well to curb these nationalist tendencies, and the nationalist tendencies among these minority groups continued. And as you know, these nationalist tendencies contributed to Ottoman Empire's decline. Okay, so far we tried to establish a background information within Ottoman Empire's reform and transformation period. In this context, we referred to the main reforms, and we also categorized them in terms of military, secular ideas, economic reforms, social reforms, and related to the citizenship. Okay, so we will continue with the establishment of new political associations in this transformation period in Ottoman Empire. Right now, we are very close to the end of this session. Therefore, I will stop here and I will continue with the establishment of political associations in the second session. As I said before, you can refer to your PowerPoint presentations, which are given for the first lecture on Sanal Campus System. You can study these presentations and also you can read your articles and books that are presented in the course outline in order to be more familiar with these subjects. Thank you very much for your participation and for listening to this lecture. I will meet you in the second session.